In the heart of rural Montana, where the wild still whispers through the ponderosa pines, lies the Wild at Heart Animal Sanctuary. It's a place of healing, of second chances, and of one resident who views every unattended item as a personal challenge. Meet Ponyo. She's not your average bobcat. Rescued and rehabilitated, she now reigns as the sanctuary's most notorious, most cunning, and most utterly charming little thief. From breakfast sausages vanishing in seconds to priceless heirlooms disappearing into thin air, nothing is safe when Ponyo's around. But when the sanctuary's future hangs in the balance, dependent on a crucial fundraising gala and the generosity of a very important guest, Ponyo's talents are about to be put to the ultimate test. This is the story of Ponyo, the bobcat who has rightfully earned the title of the sneakiest little thief in the world. You won't believe what this sneaky little thief steals next. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't. And hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The sun, a brazen orange disk, was just beginning its slow ascent over the ponderosa pines that ringed the Wild at Heart Animal Sanctuary in rural Montana. Inside the main building, the aroma of brewing coffee mingled with the fainter, more feral scent of, well, wild things. For Sarah Jenkins, the sanctuary's director, a woman whose silver ponytail was usually the only thing more untamed than some of her charges, this was the smell of home. But this particular morning, another, more specific odor was attempting to dominate the olfactory landscape. Burnt toast. Ponyo! The exasperated cry echoed through the linoleum-tiled kitchen. It was a name uttered with a unique blend of affection, frustration, and sheer disbelief at least a dozen times a day. Ponyo, the bobcat who had elevated petty larceny to an art form, was at it again. Standing by the toaster, her face a mask of smoky chagrin, was Brenda Kowalski, a retired kindergarten teacher whose patience was legendary, though Ponyo tested its very foundations daily. Brenda, a volunteer with a heart as big as Montana itself, usually handled the morning meal prep for the smaller mammals. Today, it seemed Ponyo had decided to assist. "Honestly, Sarah," Brenda said, waving a spatula at the offending appliance, "I just turned my back for a second, 1 second, and poof, my second slice of sourdough gone. Then I smell this." She pointed the spatula towards the far corner of the kitchen, where a small, tawny feline with tufted ears and eyes like molten gold was currently attempting to shove a blackened piece of toast under a precariously stacked pile of what appeared to be one gardening glove, a half-eaten apple core, and a sparkly Christmas ornament despite it being late May. This was Ponyo, the Houdini of hair ties, the purloiner of pancakes, the bandit of, well, anything that wasn't nailed down, and sometimes even things that were. Ponyo's journey to Wild at Heart had been a heart-wrenching one. Found as a tiny, orphaned kitten near a highway, her back leg mangled by what the vet suspected was a glancing blow from a car, her chances had been slim. Weeks of intensive care, delicate surgery, and round-the-clock feeding by Sarah and the team had saved her. But the injury, though healed, left her with a slight, almost imperceptible limp and a compromised ability to hunt with the explosive speed and agility required for survival in the rugged Montana wilderness. She was, in essence, too wild for a house, too habituated to humans and their easily accessible food sources, for a completely independent life back in the wild. So, Ponyo became a permanent resident, a beautiful, frustrating, endlessly entertaining enigma. She had adapted to indoor life with a wild twist. The sprawling sanctuary grounds offered her a large, secure outdoor enclosure where she could climb trees, stalk imaginary prey, and bask in the sun, every inch the majestic wildcat. But a portion of her time, especially during harsh weather or for medical observation, was spent in a specially designed area within the main building, which, unfortunately for the staff, included access to the kitchen, her primary hunting ground. "She's building another nest?" Sarah asked, a weary smile playing on her lips as she approached the corner. Ponyo, caught red-pawed, let out a low, guttural growl, her amber eyes glinting with a possessiveness that was entirely out of proportion to the value of her hoard. The toast, clearly a prized acquisition, was now tucked securely beneath the glove. "It's her treasure trove," sighed Mike Henderson, the sanctuary's stoic handyman and jack of all trades, as he walked in, wiping grease from his hands. Mike had seen it all: bears with toothaches, eagles with broken wings, and now a bobcat with a hoarding problem. "Found my good wool sock in there yesterday, the one without the hole." Ponyo's gifts were legendary. Smelly shoes were a particular favorite, often discovered with a chuffing sound from Ponyo if she was nearby when a human found her latest relocation project. Pancakes, swiped directly from the breakfast table during a moment of distraction, would be paraded around like a freshly caught rabbit before being hidden. One memorable Tuesday, she'd managed to drag a brightly colored welcome mat halfway across the common room before getting tangled in it, resulting in a snarling, fluffy bundle of indignation that took 2 members of staff and a strategically deployed feather duster to resolve. No drawer was safe, no cabinet impenetrable. Ponyo had learned, with a terrifying blend of feline grace and sheer, untamed persistence, how to hook her surprisingly nimble paws around handles and pull. She'd unlatched Tupperware containers with the dexterity of a seasoned safecracker. Trash bags were not obstacles but invitations, often resulting in what looked like a confetti explosion of coffee grounds and potato peelings, with Ponyo sitting placidly in the center, grooming a paw as if to say, "What mess?" The legendary sausage heist was still spoken of in hushed, awestruck tones. Old Man Hemlock, a grizzled but kindly donor who often brought treats for the staff, had left a string of his famous homemade venison sausages on the counter, intending to share them. He'd turned to hang up his coat, a matter of perhaps 10 seconds. When he turned back, the sausages were gone. A frantic search ensued, punctuated by the faint, rhythmic thumping coming from under the largest armchair in the lounge. There, wedged impossibly into the narrow space, was Ponyo, eyes blissfully closed, methodically devouring link after link, a tiny, satisfied growl rumbling in her chest. She hadn't even bothered to drag them to her treasure trove, the temptation too immediate, too succulent. "All right, you little rascal," Sarah said, crouching down. Ponyo's ears swiveled, her gaze never leaving Sarah's, but the growl softened a fraction. "What have you got for us today, huh? Another masterpiece of modern art?" Ponyo blinked slowly, then, with a sudden, lightning-fast movement, darted her paw out and batted at a loose strand of Sarah's ponytail. It was a game they often played, a strange mix of wild instinct and learned behavior. "She's just keeping us on our toes," Brenda said, now chuckling as she scraped the charred remains of her original toast into the compost bin. "And reminding us that breakfast is serious business." The weeks leading up to the annual Wild at Heart Gala, the sanctuary's biggest fundraising event, were always a chaotic blend of excitement and stress. This year, it was amplified. A local philanthropist, Mrs. Eleanor Ainsworth, a woman whose checks were as generous as her affection for furry creatures, had pledged a substantial matching grant, but only if the sanctuary could raise a specific, rather daunting sum during the gala itself. The pressure was on. Decorations were slowly beginning to appear. Boxes of fairy lights, streamers, and carefully crafted centerpieces made by local schoolchildren were stored in the spare office. Or, at least, they were supposed to be. "Has anyone seen the box of gold ribbon?" asked a flustered Emily, a young veterinary intern whose organizational skills were constantly being challenged by the sanctuary's resident kleptomaniac. "The one with the little jingle bells attached?" A collective groan went up from the staff gathered in the break room. All eyes instinctively turned towards the areas Ponyo was known to frequent. "Don't look at me," Mike grumbled, though he was already scanning the top of the bookshelves. "I specifically put that box on the highest shelf, the very highest." But Ponyo was a creature of surprising ingenuity and athletic prowess. A high shelf was merely an invitation to demonstrate her climbing skills. Later that day, the mystery was solved when Barnaby, the sanctuary's elderly three-legged beagle, trotted proudly into the kitchen, a long strand of gold ribbon trailing from his collar, complete with a jingle bell that announced his every move. Following him, looking utterly pleased with herself, was Ponyo. She'd clearly been playing with the ribbon, and Barnaby, ever tolerant, had likely wandered through her game. "Oh, for crying out loud, Ponyo!" Emily exclaimed, half laughing, half despairing. "Barnaby is not a Christmas tree." Ponyo merely blinked, then rubbed against Barnaby's good leg, a rumbling purr emanating from her chest. Barnaby, in turn, licked her tufted ear. It seemed this particular interaction had resulted in an interspecies moment of calm amidst the chaos. Her thieving wasn't always so benignly amusing. Snack packs, carefully prepared for diabetic animals, had vanished, causing frantic searches and emergency ration adjustments. Hair ties, a particular Ponyo obsession, were hoarded like precious jewels, often reappearing in the most unexpected places. Discovered by Brenda when sifting flour, tangled in the computer wires, or fished out of the water dish of Sheldon, the grumpy snapping turtle. Even injuries didn't slow her down. A few months prior, she'd misjudged a leap from the countertop to the top of the refrigerator, a favored napping spot with a commanding view of the kitchen, and landed awkwardly, spraining her paw. For a week, she'd limped, her wild spirit momentarily dampened. But even then, her laser focus on acquisition remained. She'd simply adapted her technique, using her good paw with even greater cunning, dragging items towards her with a focused intensity that was almost unnerving. The kitchen remained her El Dorado. One afternoon, Sarah was meticulously preparing a special dietary supplement for a recovering owl. It was a complex, time-consuming process involving several precise measurements of expensive powders and liquids. She'd arranged everything on a tray: tiny vials, a miniature measuring spoon, a small bowl. Needing a distilled water bottle from the pantry, she left the tray on the counter for no more than 30 seconds. When she returned, the tray was still there. But the tiny, gleaming silver measuring spoon was gone. Sarah sighed. She knew, with a certainty born of long experience, who the culprit was. She scanned the kitchen. No Ponyo. This was unusual. Usually, Ponyo liked to observe the immediate aftermath of her heists, a glint of mischievous triumph in her eyes. A tiny, almost imperceptible scratching sound drew Sarah's attention to the closed pantry door. Ponyo was not supposed to be in the pantry. It was strictly off-limits, a veritable Fort Knox of kibble, canned food, and apparently irresistible measuring spoons. The door latch had been a bit tricky lately. Mike had it on his list to fix. Ponyo, with her knack for exploiting any weakness, must have nudged it open. Sarah slowly approached the door and pressed her ear against it. More scratching. Then a faint, frustrated chuff. She eased the door open a crack. There was Ponyo, not with the spoon, but batting curiously at a large, unopened sack of premium cat kibble, the expensive kind, reserved for animals with sensitive stomachs. Its crinkly texture seemed to fascinate her. She wasn't aggressively trying to tear it open, but rather pawing at it, sniffing intently, perhaps drawn by a faint novel scent leaking from the heavy bag. The missing measuring spoon lay forgotten nearby on the floor. "Ponyo?" Sarah said softly. The bobcat startled, spinning around. She looked at Sarah, then back at the intriguing kibble sack, and let out a small, questioning "Murrow." It was the sound she often made when curious or seeking attention. This was new. This wasn't her usual grab-and-guard routine. Sarah frowned. "What are you doing in here, you rascal?" She retrieved the spoon. As Sarah was about to gently shoo Ponyo from the pantry, a very faint, almost inaudible mewling sound reached her ears. It was so soft, she almost dismissed it as the old building settling. She strained to listen. There it was again, a tiny, pathetic cry, seeming to come from the direction of the isolation rooms down the hall. Her heart clenched. "Oh no," she whispered. Just yesterday, they had taken in a new rescue. A litter of 3 feral kittens, barely a few weeks old, found abandoned in a drainpipe. They were weak, scared, and one, in particular, the runt of the litter, was struggling. They were being kept in a quiet, warm room, far from the bustle of the main sanctuary to minimize stress. Emily was due to check on them, but a sudden worry tightened Sarah's chest. Ponyo, meanwhile, had lost interest in the kibble sack once Sarah's attention was on it. She rubbed against Sarah's legs, purring. Then, perhaps hearing the faint mewling herself or simply following Sarah's gaze, she trotted out of the pantry and looked down the hallway towards the isolation rooms. Her ears perked. Sarah, her earlier annoyance forgotten, felt a surge of concern for the kittens. "Let's go check, Ponyo," she murmured, more to herself than the bobcat. As they approached the quiet room, the mewling became more distinct. Sarah gently pushed open the door. In a large, soft-lined crate, 2 of the kittens were huddled together, sleeping. The third, the tiny runt, a scrap of gray fluff, was lying listlessly on its side, its cries weak and infrequent. He looked worse than yesterday. Ponyo, who had followed Sarah in, tensed slightly. Her ears swiveled forward, her nose twitched, sniffing the air. She let out a soft, low trill, a sound Sarah had rarely heard from her, a sound usually reserved for moments of intense curiosity or alertness. It wasn't a growl of possession, nor the playful chuff of mischief. It was something else, softer. Sarah carefully set down the spoon she still held and focused on the kitten. Ponyo, uncharacteristically, didn't bolt or cause a ruckus. She approached the crate slowly, cautiously. She sniffed the air, her body low to the ground, moving with the fluid grace of a true predator. Yet there was no immediate menace in her posture, more a wary curiosity. She reached the crate and peered through the bars. The 2 healthier kittens hissed, tiny, needle-like teeth bared. Ponyo ignored them. Her gaze was fixed on the fading runt. She sat perfectly still for a long moment, just watching. Then, she did something that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Ponyo began to purr. Not the rumbling, possessive purr she used when guarding her stolen treasures, but a deep, resonant thrumming. It was a sound often associated with contentment in domestic cats, but in a bobcat, it felt different, more primal. The little runt, so weak it hadn't moved in an hour, twitched an ear. its tiny head lifted just a fraction. Ponyo then reached a paw ever so gently towards the bars of the crate, not extending her claws. She didn't try to grab. She just rested her paw near the tiny kitten. This was the heart-wrenching part for Sarah. Not because Ponyo was being cruel, but because of the unexpected, gentle curiosity displayed by this incorrigible little thief towards such a vulnerable creature. This wild animal, whose primary mode of interaction seemed to be larceny, was showing a quiet intensity that Sarah found deeply touching. Later, reflecting on the pantry incident, Sarah wondered, Ponyo's fascination with the crinkly premium kibble sack, her presence there when Sarah heard the kitten's cries, was it all just a coincidence? Or had some subtle scent from the distressed kittens, imperceptible to humans, drawn Ponyo to that area, making her more restless, more exploratory? Perhaps her batting at the kibble bag was simply what a curious bobcat did when investigating new stimuli. Sarah couldn't know for sure, but the timing felt significant. The connection was one Sarah made, a possibility she mulled over rather than a clear demonstration from Ponyo. Over the next few days, under strict supervision, Sarah allowed Ponyo to be in the same room as the kittens for short periods. Ponyo would often settle near the crate, sometimes purring, sometimes just watching with those intense golden eyes. The runt, whom Emily had started calling Pip, began to rally. He was taking his formula with more vigor, his cries growing stronger. Sarah couldn't prove Ponyo's presence, her low purrs, or even just her quiet company had a direct effect. But she felt it contributed to the peaceful atmosphere that surely helped the fragile kitten. The measuring spoon, incidentally, was found a week later inside one of Mike's boots, along with 3 bottle caps and a suspiciously clean chicken bone. Ponyo, it seemed, had simply abandoned it in the pantry and later, during one of her collecting sprees, relocated it with other treasures. The gala approached, and with it, a new level of organized chaos. Tables needed setting, speeches needed writing, and Mrs. Eleanor Ainsworth, a formidable woman with a keen eye for detail and an even keener love for bobcats. She'd heard all about Ponyo's exploits and was, by all accounts, utterly charmed, was due for a pre-gala tour. "Okay, people," Sarah announced at the morning meeting 3 days before the gala. "Operation Keep Ponyo Stimulated is now in full effect. I don't want her investigating the banquet hall decorations too closely or trying to collect Mrs. Ainsworth's handbag." A chuckle went around the room. "Mike, you're on distraction duty. Toys, feather wands, maybe even that laser pointer she can never quite catch." Mike grinned. "Consider it done. Me and the little outlaw have an understanding." The day of Mrs. Ainsworth's tour arrived, bright and sunny. The sanctuary was scrubbed, polished, and buzzing with nervous energy. Ponyo, true to form, had started the day by attempting to steal a powdered donut directly from Brenda's hand, resulting in a fine dusting of sugar on her whiskered snout, making her look rather like a tiny, disgruntled baker. Sarah was just explaining the sanctuary's rehabilitation program for injured raptors when Mrs. Ainsworth, a woman whose diamonds sparkled almost as brightly as her eyes when she talked about animals, paused. "And this, I presume," she said, her voice laced with amusement, "is the infamous Ponyo's primary domain?" They were standing at the entrance to the kitchen. "Indeed," Sarah said, bracing herself, "though Mike is currently engaged in tactical diversion maneuvers." As if on cue, a series of delighted chuffs and the skittering sound of claws on linoleum came from within. Mike emerged a moment later, looking slightly disheveled but triumphant, a brightly colored catnip mouse dangling from his fingers. "She's currently wrestling with Mr. Squeaky," he reported. "Should buy us at least 10 minutes." Mrs. Ainsworth laughed, a hearty, genuine sound. "Oh, I simply must meet this little character. Her reputation precedes her." Despite Sarah's misgivings, she couldn't very well refuse. "All right, but be warned. She has a particular fondness for shiny objects and unattended purses." Mrs. Ainsworth merely smiled, clutching her expensive leather handbag a little tighter, but her eyes danced with anticipation. They found Ponyo in her outdoor enclosure, where she'd retreated after her battle with Mr. Squeaky. She was perched on a low branch of her favorite pine tree, grooming her paw with meticulous care, the picture of serene innocence. Until she spotted Mrs. Ainsworth's rather large, diamond-encrusted brooch. Ponyo's head snapped up. Her ears swiveled forward. Her golden eyes, usually narrowed in playful cunning, widened, fixated on the glittering jewel. It was, to Ponyo, clearly a magnificent, shiny new object, utterly irresistible, much like the Christmas ornament she'd previously acquired. It outshone every smelly sock, every stolen sausage, every pilfered pancake in its immediate allure. "Oh my," Mrs. Ainsworth murmured, noticing the Bobcat's intense focus. "She has expensive taste." Before anyone could react, Ponyo launched herself from the branch. It wasn't a direct attack. It was far too quick, too precise for that. One moment she was on the tree, the next she was a tawny blur, landing lightly on the grass, then executing a graceful, almost balletic leap. Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. "Ponyo, no!" But it was too late. With a flick of her paw, so swift it was almost invisible, Ponyo snagged at the brooch. Her claws caught not the entire piece. Her aim wasn't that perfect, or perhaps Mrs. Ainsworth's startled flinch had shifted the target. But a small, dangling pearl charm attached to the bottom of it, which detached with a faint click. She landed silently, the tiny pearl now in her mouth, and then, with a burst of wild energy, she was off, streaking towards the dense bushes at the far end of her enclosure, a tiny, triumphant chuff echoing behind her. New treasure acquired. Silence. Mrs. Ainsworth stared, her hand instinctively going to her now slightly less adorned brooch. Mike looked horrified. Brenda, who had joined them, let out a small gasp. Sarah closed her eyes for a brief moment. Of all the things Ponyo could have stolen, of all the times she could have chosen to showcase her signature move, this was by far the most spectacularly disastrous. The matching grant, the gala's success, all of it felt like it was teetering on the brink of a Ponyo-induced catastrophe. "Well," Mrs. Ainsworth finally said, breaking the tense silence. Her voice was surprisingly calm. "She certainly lives up to her name. Sneaky little thief, indeed." She even had a faint smile on her face, though her eyes were wide. "Mrs. Ainsworth, I am so terribly sorry," Sarah began, her voice filled with genuine mortification. "We'll get it back. Ponyo, she has these little stashes, her treasure troves. We'll find it. Mike, you know her spots." Mike nodded grimly. "I'll start looking. Though with Ponyo, it could be anywhere. Last week, I found a biscuit in the first aid kit." What followed was a frantic, increasingly desperate search. Mike, Sarah, and Brenda scoured Ponyo's enclosure. They checked under every bush, inside every hollow log, atop every rock. Ponyo, meanwhile, watched them from a high perch, occasionally grooming a paw, the pearl presumably stashed in a new favorite hiding spot, looking utterly unconcerned, the very picture of feline indifference. Hours passed. The sun began to dip towards the horizon. The pearl charm, a family heirloom Mrs. Ainsworth later admitted, was nowhere to be found. The mood at the sanctuary was somber. Sarah felt a wave of despair wash over her. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the trust, the reputation of Wild at heart. Mrs. Ainsworth, to her credit, had been remarkably understanding, though clearly distressed. "It's just a thing, my dear," she'd said to Sarah, patting her arm. "A sentimental thing, yes, but still just a thing. Don't let it ruin all your hard work." She'd even confirmed she would still attend the gala, though her earlier ebullience was noticeably diminished. That evening, Sarah sat alone in the quiet kitchen, long after everyone else had gone home. The only sound was the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional soft snore from Barnaby, asleep in his bed by the stove. She felt defeated. Lately, Ponyo had been spending more time indoors, often lingering near the hallway that led to the kitten room, even though Pip and his siblings were growing rapidly. Sarah had noticed Ponyo sometimes carried her newest treasures, a stolen pen, a bright bottle cap, towards that area, before ultimately depositing them in one of her more established outdoor caches. Perhaps the quiet and warmth near the kitten room appealed to her. Tonight, Ponyo seemed restless. She wasn't settling in her usual spots. She paced by the kitchen door, then looked at Sarah and let out a soft "murrow," a sound that usually meant she wanted a door opened or was curious about something. Sarah, preoccupied and weary, initially ignored her. But Ponyo persisted, rubbing against Sarah's legs, then returning to the door, meowing again, a little more insistently. Sighing, Sarah got up. "All right, Ponyo, what is it now? You want out? You want in? Make up your mind." She opened the kitchen door that led to the main sanctuary hallway. Ponyo didn't bolt outside as she sometimes did. Instead, she trotted purposefully down the hall towards the kitten room. This wasn't entirely unusual. Sarah had seen her linger there before. Curiosity, or perhaps the lingering scent of the small creatures, seemed to draw her. Sarah followed, a faint sense of unease mixing with her fatigue. Ponyo paused at the kitten room door, which was slightly ajar. She nudged it further open with her head and slipped inside. Sarah watched, expecting Ponyo to just sniff around as she sometimes did. The kittens were asleep in their crate. Ponyo, however, didn't go to the crate. She went to a shadowy corner of the room, one that was usually overlooked, behind a stack of spare blankets. This was an area Ponyo had shown some interest in before, a quiet, secluded spot. She sniffed the ground, then sat, looking toward the spot. Sarah, her curiosity piqued despite her mood, wondered if Ponyo had perhaps stashed something less valuable there earlier. She fumbled for her phone, turning on its flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the dusty corner. And there, nestled on a small, haphazard pile of dried leaves, a stray sock of Mike's, and a single, rather tattered feather, typical Ponyo nest components, was Mrs. Ainsworth's pearl charm. It wasn't displayed, nor was it alone. It was simply part of the jumble of items in this little hidey hole Ponyo had recently favored. And curled up nearby, having apparently sought out this quiet corner as well, was Pip. He wasn't with his siblings in the main crate, but was resting a few inches from Ponyo's collection, including the pearl. He stirred, opened his eyes, blinked in the light, and then snuggled deeper into the soft bedding Sarah had placed there earlier. Sarah stared, utterly dumbfounded. Ponyo hadn't given the pearl to Pip in a human sense. It was more likely that this corner had become one of her new preferred spots for her treasures, and Pip, in his own kittenish way, had also found the spot comforting and quiet. The pearl was there because Ponyo had dropped it or left it there among her other pilfered goods. Yet, the sight of the valuable lost heirloom so close to the little kitten she'd shown such gentle curiosity towards, it struck a chord deep within Sarah. Ponyo looked at Sarah, then blinked slowly, as if wondering what the fuss was about. This was just one of her spots, with some of her things. "Oh, Ponyo," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You absolute, confounding, incredible creature." The logic was pure Bobcat. A good shiny thing, a good safe spot. The heartwarming part was the beautiful, accidental juxtaposition. Gently, carefully, Sarah picked up the pearl charm. Pip remained asleep. Ponyo watched Sarah, her tail giving a slow, almost imperceptible twitch. She didn't growl. She didn't try to snatch it back. It was, after all, just one of many interesting objects that passed through her possession. The next morning, Sarah called Mrs. Ainsworth. "Eleanor," she said, "I have some rather unbelievable news about your pearl charm." The gala was that evening. When Mrs. Ainsworth arrived, Sarah met her at the door, holding a small, velvet-lined box. "Ponyo had it," Sarah explained, a smile playing on her lips as she recounted the discovery in the kitten room. The haphazard nest, the pearl amidst Ponyo's other oddities, and Pip sleeping so peacefully nearby. It seems this corner has become one of Ponyo's new favorite spots for her collection. And Pip apparently finds it a comforting spot too. The pearl was just there, among other things. Mrs. Ainsworth listened, her expression shifting from polite interest to wide-eyed amazement, and finally, to a warm, knowing smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. She took the box and opened it. The pearl charm lay nestled within, gleaming softly. "That little Bobcat," Mrs. Ainsworth said, shaking her head slowly, a chuckle escaping her. "She's not just a thief, Sarah. She's a catalyst for the most peculiar and wonderful discoveries." She paused, then looked at Sarah, her eyes twinkling. "Tell me, how is little Pip doing now? And his accidental benefactor, Ponyo?" That evening, during her speech, after announcing her substantial donation, which, to everyone's delight, she increased significantly, Mrs. Ainsworth shared the story of Ponyo and the pearl. The audience was captivated, laughter mixing with audible awes. The tale of the thieving Bobcat whose hoarding habits had led to a lost heirloom being found in the company of a rescued kitten was the highlight of the night. The serendipity of it, the image of the wild Bobcat and the tiny kitten sharing a quiet corner, captured everyone's imagination. Ponyo, oblivious to her newfound fame as an indirect agent of good fortune, was safely ensconced in her enclosure, probably dreaming of her next heist. Perhaps a particularly enticing sequin from a gala gown or a stray canapé. Life at Wild at Heart returned to its usual rhythm of controlled chaos. Ponyo continued her reign as the sneakiest little thief in Montana. She still stole shoes, though Brenda now dutifully checked them for unexpected treasures before putting them on. She still raided the kitchen, though Sarah found herself looking at these transgressions with a new layer of fond exasperation, always wondering where Ponyo's latest acquisitions might turn up and what amusing, coincidental stories they might create. The sanctuary thrived, thanks in no small part to the legend of Ponyo. Visitors would ask to see her, hoping to catch a glimpse of the Bobcat who stole everything. whose wild instincts sometimes led to the most heartwarming, if entirely accidental, outcomes. A few weeks after the gala, Sarah was walking past the kitten room. Pip and his siblings, now boisterous and healthy, were due to be moved to a larger enclosure. She peeked in. Ponyo was nearby in the hallway, watching the activity with interest from a distance. Pip, bolder than his siblings, was at the edge of his playpen, batting at a dust mote. Their paths had crossed in a way that Sarah would always cherish, a reminder of the surprising turns life could take, all thanks to a sneaky little bobcat with an insatiable curiosity for anything that wasn't tied down. And every so often, Sarah would find a small, smooth stone or a particularly interesting beetle carefully stashed in an unexpected place. And she'd know Ponyo was still out there, curating her world, one peculiar, precious, stolen gift at a time. The mystery of her choices would always remain, but the warmth and laughter she brought to their lives were undeniable. You just had to check your pockets and your shoes very, very carefully.